Welcome to this component of the Aging and Spirituality Conference. I'm Nancy Schweers, and I'm most honored to be able to be here with you. I'm going to talk today out of my personal experience and invite you to observe, to question within yourself, since we're not together in person, to authenticate your own experience, to make some choices about what you might like to do in light of having had this experience of listening to what I know and what I think, and to reflect and respond in ways that will take you further on your spiritual journey. The plan is for me to introduce myself a little bit with my credentials of caregiving as well as my academic and professional experience, to offer a perspective on aging from a developmental point of view, and give a perspective of spirituality as a shared human experience. And then I'm going to end with reading 4 personal reflections of the intersection of my own aging and spirituality that's pretty personal, but is also a composite of things that I have heard and felt from my work and from my caring for my own mother. There are finally some brief suggestions of reading. Actually, they're my own list of things I would like to read, and a prayer at the very end. So, who am I? Well, basically, I've discovered through the years that I'm a nurturer and a caregiver at heart. When I was a little girl, pink and blue was what I would say when people said, "What's your favorite color?" And that's because I adored my dolls. And I was a little mother even when I was just 4 or 5 years old. I was fortunate enough to grow up with both sets of grandmothers and grandfathers nearby. And so I was always around older people as well, and have always had a fondness for older people as well as babies. And there were lots of church surrogate parents for me, even as a young adult in the parish where we were when we were early married and had our little children, still the parish where we are now. But many people there nurtured us along in our adulthood as well. And then around age 30 or so, I received a call, is the way we put it sometimes in our tradition, to prayer and service and evangelism, and that led me to becoming a chaplain eventually. I went first to school just with lots and lots of questions. I went to the Oblate School of Theology and studied there for a Master of Theological Studies, is what it ended up being, with a concentration in spirituality. Afterwards, a couple of the things that I've done, lots of continuing education, is I took a class for spiritual directors at the Center for Spiritual Growth in the Contemplative Life here in San Antonio. And then one fall, when Mama first got sick, I took a leave of absence, a medical leave for her, and went to the Perkins School of Theology at SMU and studied Christianity and the global community, which was a very interesting experience to broaden my perspective on things. Professionally, I was a teacher for a very short time after college, but once I had my babies, I got interested in the mother-baby business. And so I was a mother-baby advocate for about 30 years, doing all kinds of things from volunteerism to influencing legislation for the WIC program. It was great. During that time, I also became a lay Eucharistic minister, and that was under the auspices of the diocese and my parish, and did worship leading for several different nursing homes, and was a very rich time of life where I presented little teachings on the scripture for the day and really meditated a lot on what that might mean to the people who were living in the nursing homes where I went to visit. I became a professional chaplain about 12 years ago, and lately I've been one of the chaplains who is assigned to the acute care for the elderly, a special unit at Santa Rosa, where we particularly focus on the elderly. We're staffed by gerontologists and by nurses who are particularly trained and interested in that. So I've learned a lot in the last year or two just from that point of view. Now, aging. There are lots of ways to look at this, and it's becoming a more and more popular subject. But looking at it from a developmental point of view, if you think about it, we begin our aging when we're born. And we just call it different things during the first part of life. We call it growing up, or coming into one's own, or beginning again, when we get midlife or have those little crises or whatever. Piaget and Erickson, for those of you who've done some of the study on human development, have really delineated particularly those particular stages of aging, or development as we call it. I like to think of aging as having its own stages. And in fact, I remember thinking when I was in my 50s, I think I'm in the infancy of old age. I don't really know where I'm going or what I'm doing, and I really am a babe in the woods here, but I've got my AARP card, so something must be happening. And then as we get a little bit closer to maybe around 60 or so and begin looking at all of the things that there are to think about with retirement, and it seems like we're bombarded with the financial aspects of it, but there's a whole lot more to it than that. I think about that's kind of like being a kid in school and just trying to learn the ropes and, what's next and how do I do it and what do I need to know and who are the advisors I should see and that sort of thing. I just went to my 50th high school reunion, and one of our classmates she said, we all know how old we are, right? She said, we're in the adolescence of old age here. And I thought, well, yeah, that would be about right. And so she says, we can cut ourselves a lot of slack and remember what it was like when we were real adolescents. And so that's kind of where I personally am today. And I remember my mother talking about this when she was about my age. She said, it's so strange. She said, it's a little bit like being a teenager, because your body is doing all these things that you really don't know what's happening. This isn't what you expected or exactly how to handle it. And so there I am. They call sometimes this part of settling into old age, which we might in our privileged culture be in our 70s, the encore of adulthood. So I'm looking at that to see what that might feel like to be settled into being a mature person. I don't know exactly whether I'm going to manage that well or not, but I think that's one of the stages of this aging. And then I've heard lately the term the silver tsunami. And that could mean for our demographics, as baby boomers get to be the age where their hair is turning gray. And it also might be the overwhelmingness of being the old, which is where we're headed if we're so fortunate to live a long life. So we might look at some of the things that are happening during these stages of aging as a rebirthing, as a growing incompetence, as a coming into our own identity, and of having the wherewithal to be generative once more in a very meaningful way. In fact, I've often thought we may become a culture of grandparents if we're so lucky to not be too self-centered about our aging. And then the integration, which actually this presentation is a good opportunity for me to do some of that beginning stages of integration of all that we've been and all that we are and all that we hope to be. In these stages, we hope that there's a transformation that continues of those who are able to embrace an authentic spirituality and to be nurtured by the humility to know that there's more to learn, there's more, and there are limitations to what we already are and will be, and to be celebrated by those who are brave enough to celebrate whatever comes, and to stay true to ourselves and true to all that we can learn and know. So how might we look at spirituality? Well, spirituality is a word that's used a lot these days, and most of us like the word, and it might mean different things to different people. But this is one perspective, that it might be the way that we are, the aspect of ourselves that might include religion and its practices. In fact, for me, and probably for most of you, that's a very important part of spirituality, is a certain set of beliefs and practices and traditions that help to guide us in our way of life. It always goes beyond the mere bonds of tradition and community, though, which is an interesting thing because religion tends to bind us, to give us some boundaries, and that's good. But spirituality always says there's more. There's more. And It is definitely, I believe, a human phenomenon with divine implications. In other words, each of us has a human spirit. And because I'm a Christian, I believe that God is calling us, is calling our human spirit to be involved with the divine spirit, with His Holy Spirit, to enjoy the whole life of the Trinity. But in any tradition, there is the human phenomenon, and there is a call to something more. And sometimes it's considered a divine something more. It does demand a commitment to a continuing conversion, to always ask the next question, and to do the next right thing as best we can know it. And in our case, with God's help, certainly. It contains a dynamism that creates and sustains the life abundant when practiced with openness and honesty. That's quite a challenge if you just think about what that would mean, to truly act with openness and honesty. Sometimes it's a little dangerous, but it always asks us to be present to the present and to be ready to grow beyond today. When I am with people in the hospital as a chaplain, and when I reflect upon my own self and the people I know otherwise, these are some of the things that I see that happen as we age to our spirituality. And you'll notice that some of them are even opposites, and each one of them would be a very interesting thing for us to explore if we were together and had all day. I see a burst in faith development sometimes as people get older, and they really want to know the answers. They really want to have some meaning and purpose in their life, that maybe they've just been too busy making a living or going from day to day, or maybe they've reached a crisis of some sort. Sometimes there's a loss of faith. Everything that they thought was true doesn't seem to be working out anymore. Sometimes there's a definite gratitude for the habits of devotion, or if people don't recognize it themselves as a gratitude, I see it. I'm grateful that they have the habits of devotion that are going to carry them through the crisis. And there are also patterns of acceptance and anticipation of newness that have been developed through a lifetime. There are challenges that go beyond our resources when we get older, and there's the danger of falling into denial, just pretending it's not happening, and getting stuck where we are and not knowing what to do. There's the wisdom of silence, and I put a capital S there because you know and I know what that means. It's not just the absence of noise. It's something that's deeper. And sometimes there's the fear of absence if and when that silence comes. When we recognize our own spiritual strengths and we help other people to recognize theirs, it helps the whole continuum of the spiritual journey to move. Helping with prayerful attention, with active listening with more than our ears, watching for body language and for hesitancies in somebody's voice and whatever it is that might be, and maybe just listening to our own intuition, and then offering practical advice and encouragement. So that's kind of the overview of the way I see aging and spirituality in just a nutshell. And I'd like now to take a minute to read 4 little reflections on aging and spirituality. And I'd like for you to listen for, well, for one, I hope they'll be thought-provoking, that there might be something in it that makes you question, well, I wonder why she said that, or makes you recognize yourself. Listen for the spirituality, for the pull towards more and more truth and goodness. That might be the challenge to authentic growth in each one. And then pray with me for the continued dynamism of the Spirit within each of us. I've ended each one of these little stories with a scripture because that's the way I tend to find myself reintegrating when I get to a place where I'm not feeling real steady. So, with your permission. The Old Grey Mare. This is a memory of my grandmother, Lola Hill, in about 1984. She walked down the hall of the nursing home that her older brother helped to found at the turn of the last century. She walked tall and straight, all 4 feet 11 inches of her. She was at home. She had cared for her beloved husband and her older brother here, visiting daily, remembering their days gone by, playing the piano in the common area for her old friends. She greeted them with a hidden sadness in her voice. Now it was her turn. The old gray mare, she ain't what she used to be. She quoted that opening line of the song whenever we went to visit. And then she'd offer a little wistful, good-humored laugh, a sign of authentic humility. There was a poignant level of self-awareness. Sometimes she would quote poetry that she had learned as a child. And sometimes we would just sit together in silence. Her room had the aura of a retreat house, a house of prayer. She left us very slowly over weeks, months, years, finally succumbing to the aftermath of the ubiquitous broken hip. It was many long years ago. We are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. The price of freedom. We sat at the kitchen table and carefully planned the response to the terrorist attack, or so it seemed to us. Daddy had died quietly one night recently, and he just didn't wake up from his perch on the sofa bed in front of the TV. Now we knew we were vulnerable as the Twin Towers, vulnerable to the terror of death. We were now companions to the rest of creation. We sat at the kitchen table and plotted and planned for the next attack. How shall we live knowing death is coming again sooner or later, knowing it may not be so quiet next time? At nearly 80, life was diminishing for my mother, but she chose to live, knowing that a fall could happen, yet choosing to take the risk of independence, the price of freedom, to live until you die. We talked of how her parents died, how old they were, and what made them leave their home, quit driving, have a companion move in, go to the nursing home. What events, signs, symptoms precipitated these decisions and changes? We made a list, and then we lived in freedom. For nearly 10 years, she was at home, drove to church and to the store, climbed the stairs to her bedroom and bath. Now at 90, she still takes big steps with her walker and her physical therapist. She bravely admits that she cannot take care of herself, and she strongly asks for the companionship she needs. It is the price of freedom, not always safety first. Choose life. 3 quotes. It's harder on you than it is on her. That's what people say when they hear that I'm helping to care for my 90-year-old mother. I think they mean to be offering sympathy, or maybe merely pity. I need to go visit your mother. When is a good time? Well, she's always there, just sleeping and eating mostly, so there's no bad time to visit. And yet, they so seldom do. I understand. It's sometimes slow and boring, the opposite of 21st century culture. Yet, it's also peaceful, with that peace that passes understanding. Does she even know she's in pain? They ask when I tell of the moaning that seems to reorganize her body, soul, and spirit. 40 years ago, we said babies didn't experience pain with circumcision. What were we thinking? Maybe it's just too much to bear, to be aware of the pain of another's aging, of another's dying, of another's labor, another's initiation. Job's friends meant well too. Let the dead bury the dead. Honor your father and your mother. I know that my Redeemer lives. My mother, myself. I never did read My Mother, Myself when it was a bestseller once upon a time. I cherished my relationship with my mother, and I also distanced myself and felt guilty when the undertow of individuation came. And always, at least for my part, we have really known one another. Now there's the deep satisfaction of caring for her. Eventually, we became very good friends in that once upon a time. And she was my best cheerleader as I mothered my own children, even if she took my husband's side in teasing me to keep me in my place with all that heady power that comes with being a homemaker. The theme of My Mother, Myself haunts me today. Once, I wanted to be just like her. And then, I got to be just like me. I came into my own, and now I see her still brave and true, and I wonder, will I have so much courage? Will I be so patient and gracious? How will I be? I notice my husband abandoning her. It hurts to see her that way, he says. Will he not be able to see me that way too someday? Will once upon a time become tomorrow? Let today's trouble be enough for today. Consider the lilies. So here's my growing edge. This is my book list. I wanted to read Joan Chittister's new book about aging. And Joan Erickson is Erik Erikson's wife. And she lived so long that she came up with a whole other stage to his list. And there's some people who've written about that. I've seen it on the web. Richard Rohr has a new book. It's been recommended to me several times lately. And Gail Sheehy has written about the stages of caregiving. So I just offer that to you out of my personal desires. And you'll see on the slide there my email. If you want to write me for anything else or comment, I'd be happy to hear from you. I'd like to end with a prayer. This is from the Book of Common Prayer. I'm an Episcopalian, I think I told you that. And this is a prayer for the sick, but I think it's also a prayer for all of us as we're in this stage of aging and ministering to those who are aging. So, with your permission. This is another day, O Lord, and I know not what it will bring forth, but make me ready for whatever it may be. If I'm to stand up, help me to stand bravely. If I'm to sit still, help me to sit quietly. If I'm to lie low, help me to do it patiently. And if I'm to do nothing, let me do it gallantly. And make these words more than words. And give me the Spirit of Jesus.